welcome back to another episode of Business Unboxed with your host Kelly and co-host.
Cory.
Yeah. So, if you guys listened to our introductory episode, then you would know that Cory is joining us for this season. So, instead of just having to listen to me, you now get another person. So, it might be a little bit more interesting than what you used to. So, let's hope that you like
Far
it.
more interesting.
And so we kind of touched on in the first episode our backgrounds, and then we kind of touched on also what we are doing to kind of set ourselves up this year. And so we thought for the second episode, what we would do is we would just have a chat about what tools we use, whether that's work wise, personal wise, anything that we kind of use to manage ourselves during the year and manage what we need to get done. So me from an employee, and I guess like managing my personal life perspective, and Cory from business and personal management perspective, and what kind of different tools we use for those. So let's get straight into it, because I know that both of us use Notion, and you're a big promoter of Notion. You love Notion. So
hmm
I don't use it probably as much as you do, because I'm still very much learning how to use it, because there is so much to the platform that it's almost a little bit overwhelming for somebody like me who's not as
Yeah.
creative, because you can really make it your own. So I use it very basically. I've told you guys I use it for the calendar, and apart from that, I make some lists in there. But how do you use Notion for what you use for the year?
So I'm kind of in between a couple of systems. So before I merged the business, I had a Google Workspace account, which allowed me to use Notion's calendar feature because it only, unfortunately at the moment, only really works with Google. Um, but the good thing with that is that you can integrate your Notion databases into your calendar and vice versa. So sometimes what I've come across in my career is you have a project management system and it doesn't always sync that well with your calendar or your emails. So you end up with kind of two
Mm,
systems and you've got to do some manual stuff to connect the two sometimes. Whereas Notion, with the new calendar feature and now the new mail feature, which also integrates with Google, now you've got one central hub that goes across all these platforms, which is super efficient if you set it up correctly. So for me at the
mm,
moment, Phoenix Rogue, because I merged, Phoenix Rogue has kind of, I'll pull that back into just using Apple services. So I use a MacBook
mm-hmm,
Pro that pretty much runs my whole business. It means I can be flexible with where I work, which I need to be. So that all runs just through Apple Mail. I have a domain set up through Apple Mail, and that's all I need really. Unleashing Potential, we have a Microsoft account. So the way I set myself up is um, my Microsoft account links through to my Apple Calendar, and my Apple Calendar is my primary calendar for everything. So I think that
right.
can also be quite a confusing thing for some people, especially if you've got, a business, especially if you're working for yourself, or you've got, or you want to have one calendar for lots of different things. Um, so I make sure that I always have one primary calendar and everything has to go into that calendar and then it has to sync back. So I use Apple for my primary calendar for everything. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and at the moment, Notion's just separate, so I can't integrate those two things just yet. But as soon as Notion brings out the integration for Apple, I'll be back into Notion Calendar definitely.
Yeah.
Um, with Notion, I am in the process of migrating some CRMs and project management systems all back into Notion with after the merger. So I'm building project and task systems. I've just kind of semi-finished building a big CRM system. We also host lots of websites, so I'm building a system for managing hosting and plugins and all the things we do for that, um, which takes some time, but we'll get there.
Also, maybe a quick question for those who don't know: what does CRM stand for, and what is that?
Client relationship management. So it pretty
Right. So
much
that.
means a system where you log. Everyone uses it slightly differently, but usually you log um, clients, you can log suppliers, anyone in there, and track them. So for us, we have like preferred suppliers that we work with for packaging and design. They get logged in there. We have obviously clients and leads. So when a lead comes in, we pop them into the CRM. I pop some tags and details with them, some follow-up dates, and allows me to go and follow up with them, see where they're at, see what kind of project value they might be bringing to the business, what type of work they might be bringing to the business, and then we can keep in touch with them going forward. Very powerful tool.
Yes, I can understand. I've never really worked in a business that's actually had or used a CRM that I'm aware of before, but that might be because I've never been really in a space where it's product based. I've always kind of worked either like manufacturing or construction, farming. So I've never had that kind of back end platform, but I can imagine for those who do have lots of different products and different branding needs, and you have to partner with all these different people to get what you need out, that would be a super important platform. So the fact that you can kind of integrate that into Notion as well as everything else that you can put in Notion would be super helpful.
The key thing really is like Notion is an amazing tool, but it's a tool that you have to I say you kind of have to build yourself. Like it's not, there is templates that you can, and I have my own templates, but there's templates you can download for free or you can purchase, which make it a lot easier if you don't want to go and build systems yourself.
Yeah.
But I've always found in any project management system that I've ever used that there's always some sort of limitation that I want to be able to change and I can't change it. And Notion still has limitations, but it allows me a lot more flexibility to have the fields I want to have it report what I want to report, to have a different view that I want to have. Yeah.
So that's like your primary tool that you're using at work right now?
Pardon?
That's like your primary tool that you're using at work right now?
Yeah, for managing stuff. Yep, managing projects. As I say, I'm still very much in the building phase with after I integrated into the Unleashing Potential. I'm still very much moving us over from a couple of other bits of software.
Yeah.
So it's quite complex to capture. Like I don't know how many fields I've got for our CRM, but there's like a primary email, a secondary email, a primary phone number, secondary phone number. There's all these different things, and then there's certain sections in the CRM database that merge with other databases. So, for every client or lead that's in there, we link that to a project database so that the project always links back to the client, and it's like this kind of big circle. So we can always go back and see where it's been linked to. Same with the hosting. Hosting goes back, so we can kind of see what clients are hosting, what domain names that we manage for them.
And what platform, when you're designing things, do you use? Is it the Adobe suite?
Yes, yeah, we use Adobe. Adobe InDesign, Illustrator, and Photoshop are the primary tools that I use.
Nice. So I guess for me, much like Cory, where I work is Microsoft. Aren't they all Microsoft? I feel like everybody uses M365. So as you can imagine, they have some good functionality. I am an accountant, so I'm biased towards Excel because it pretty much runs finance around the world. So a lot of my day to day is in Excel. We have a lot of spreadsheets, we have a lot of queries in there. I help other users build spreadsheets and fix up their spreadsheets to get the data that they need as part of my job. And then some other platforms that I use is also Microsoft's Power BI. I'm pretty sure it's a Microsoft platform.
Yeah.
So I have built a couple of different dashboards for people, and also in the process of helping some others bulk up their dashboards and make sure that we're building the queries in the back end appropriately. Because if you are somebody that works in a lot of data, like the data space, you'll know that if a company has got a lot of data and you're trying to put it into Power BI, you kind of need to limit what's coming through, because it's going to take a lot longer to load and refresh the data if there's millions and millions of transactions in there. And so making sure that the queries in the back end that push the data through are up to date and have limits or whatever fields you need, and you're only pulling in what you need. So a bit of Power BI stuff there. And then we also use Azure Data Studio, which you heard me talk about the queries. So I tend to build my query in Azure, and then from there copy and paste it into my back end of my Power BI to get what we need. So Azure is something that I didn't actually was aware of or didn't use up until I got this role. So I've actually had to learn how to use it, and also learn how to SQL code, because our data warehouse pulls out data and we manage that using SQL coding. So I've had to learn that. And so predominantly that's the tools that I'm in all day, is Power BI, Excel, the other M365 platforms, Azure, and then for personal and podcast stuff, I tend to use Notion, and I've got my diary that I talked about in episode 1 that I've been trying to get back into this year. Ages ago, I used to have a diary, and I used to manage everything in my diary, and I think I had like 3 years in a row where I had like a diary each year, and it was fully like written out, everything was managed in there before I used any type of software. And then now I'm just getting back into a diary instead of using like a system. But like I said, I'm a beginner of Notion still, and Outlook to me, I can see the tabs that I need to use along the edge, and I can follow the little chain down. I can see what I need to see, and I've just kind of gotten used to putting things in there. Also, because I have an iPad, I can draw, and I'm not sure if you can do that in Notion. I mean, you probably can, but I can draw and like lay out things in OneNote, which is really handy for me because I do have an iPad. So when I'm drawing up concepts or data flows or anything that I'm thinking of, having them in a platform where I can draw it out on the iPad is really handy for me. So that's probably why I use OneNote more. I have so many different ideas in my OneNote that I've just drawn up with a pencil, like my Apple Pencil. So it's really handy from that point of view. So that's probably why I
Why don't
use
you
it.
use Apple Notes?
I do use Apple Notes, but for grocery lists and Christmas lists.
Oh my God.
Which
Apple Notes
you would
is a
have heard
pretty
Cory
good
say
tool.
before, that he does have a Notion templates of his own. And so one of those is a Christmas one. And so I do need to move my Christmas list, because I've already started planning the 2025 Christmas. Call me crazy, but I love Christmas. So yes, I've already started planning presents for that. And that is in Apple Notes. So I do use Apple Notes, but for like really basic things, but I do want to move that over to Notion. So I'm a work in progress on the Notion front. I'm aware it has a lot of good stuff. I just need to find the time to sit down and really work through how I want it to look, and how I want to use it, essentially, is what's kind of holding me back. But yeah, I do want to use it. But yeah, that's kind of what I use from like the work front. So if you're an accountant, if you get some experience, definitely Excel. Like, you've got to have Excel for being an accountant. Like, I don't think there's a single accountant that doesn't use Excel probably on the daily. And then Power BI, if you want to do more of that back-end data stuff, highly recommend. And Azure, I didn't really have to use it up until recently, so you probably don't need to learn how to do that kind of coding as an accountant if you want to do front-end stuff. But if you're like me and want to get into that system back-end analysis side, having some of that knowledge would be probably helpful. And I guess for a graphic designer, it's the whole Photoshop and Adobe and all that stuff.
Yeah, that's the tools that I use. I mean, with design, really, it's more about the what's the word? The theory or the planning behind what we do rather than the tools. I can design something just as good in Canva or something else, but Adobe is the kind of industry standard, and it's what I've been taught and what I know, so I stick to it.
Yeah, this is going to be a hot take from me for a second, but you've mentioned Canva, and I know we're going to get a little bit off topic here. I have dabbled in Canva, I won't lie. Can I make things look good? Absolutely not. So I just want to put a PSA out there that if you're a non-designery person like myself, and you're starting a business or thinking of starting a business, please don't assume that you can just go into the free Canva, design something that's going to actually look good and be good for your brand and your business, and then run with that. Because I'm telling you now, I try my hardest to use Canva and make things look good, but I do not have the brain or the eye for it. And so it just does not look good no matter how hard I try. So even though that tool is brilliant and it's helped a lot of people and it helps graphic designers, and I think a lot of teachers use it and a lot of people use it for a lot of different reasons to design things, unless you have that eye for design, I'm telling you it's going to look like shit either way.
Yeah, it's important for people to understand that um, the work of a designer isn't just being creative. There's a whole bunch of problem solving and process that goes into what we do. And so Canva is just a tool that you use. It doesn't mean that you can design something or that the output's going to be good just because they have the tool there. You still got to follow a whole bunch of principles that any designer would follow. So it's just a
Yeah.
tool, just like Adobe, Canva. Back in the day, I used to start doing design stuff in Microsoft Publisher. I don't even know if that still exists, but in high school, that's what we used.
Oh.
So it's about the principles of design, not the tool that you use.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you don't have those principles down, don't think you can jump in there and make yourself a quick logo and it's going to be brilliant, because I'm
Yeah.
telling you it's not. It's not. So do some, if you like that kind of thing, you're good at that kind of thing, go ahead and use Canva as a tool. It is free, so you can do it. You can find a lot of free stuff on there that you don't have to pay for if you've got the eye for it. But if you don't, I do recommend going to somebody or doing some research and learning yourself the concepts behind what makes branding and designing actually worth it. So that was just my PSA, because I know that a lot of people do just assume that they can jump in there, and I've seen some things online where people have created some, I'm sorry, but they're hideous things, and they're like, I use Canva and this is my logo, and
Oh,
I'm like,
yes. Yeah.
that ain't it. That ain't it. So that is a
Yeah.
tool that I have used but don't really use, because no matter how hard I try, it doesn't look good. I'm not a graphic designer. I can't do it. So, but yeah. All right. Is there anything else you want to add into this episode regarding anything for tools or anything that you use?
Well, we talked about Microsoft. So we have Microsoft as well. I definitely prefer Google over Microsoft. But having said that, um, if I was to start over, I'd probably almost get away with the Apple ecosystem, to be fair. Anyway, so we use Microsoft. We obviously use Zero. I don't know if that's just New Zealand and Australia or more of a global brand, but
No, they are global. They definitely are
yeah.
global. Zero has blown up.
Apple, obviously, I use ChatGPT. I have a
Yeah,
Remarkable
same here.
for note taking. So when I go and meet clients in person, I'd love to transition to doing to recording the session, because what I tended to do with when I had my Google account is when I had a meeting with a client online, I'd record the session, I'd take the transcript, and I'd feed it into ChatGPT, and it would kind of pull out
No.
a summary and a brief for the proposal. So instead of having to write notes in person, which is what I use my Remarkable for, it'd be good to do the recording. But I think there's maybe people are still a little bit uncomfortable with. It's still a bit new for me to do that. But I have a Remarkable for note taking. And then we have a whole bunch of other systems and software that we use for websites. We obviously work with Shopify. We have Klaviyo for email EDMs. What else do we have? We use LastPass to manage
Yes, I've
passwords. I
recently
use Apple's
cancelled.
passwords.
Yeah, I've recently cancelled my LastPass account. I forgot my master password, which is a key part of getting into LastPass. And then I just found I never used it. It never really synced to any of the stuff. So I had the app, but it never actually connected so I could never use the passwords because it didn't even link properly. And I was like, oh, this is just a nightmare. So I have gone back to using the passwords app, I think, on Apple. So
Mm,
I wanted to use LastPass, but honestly, passwords on Apple I find is really easy and simple to use, and it does pop up where
mm.
I need it. So yeah, I definitely use that as well.
Yeah, it's quite good. I find now that I've moved away from Google and Google Chrome, I find the LastPass app for Safari isn't very good. I have to constantly sign in, whereas with Google Chrome, I didn't have to do that. Don't know whether that's like a permissions thing or not, but
Yeah.
passwords is pretty good. Yeah, they did a very good job of kind of updating that system.
Because it's a relatively new app. Like, I don't recall Apple having that app a few years ago, or at least not the way that it is now.
No, they had passwords in Safari, so you always had like a Safari in the settings. There was always like a password section, but now they've made it more like a password manager. So on your phone, on your laptop, or whatever, you've got like a centralized hub. You can get all the stuff that most managers do. You've got the codes, the authentication codes, and the backup codes and passwords. They've segregated things, so you've got like a Wi-Fi section, I think, which is quite cool. But if you're in the Apple
Oh,
ecosystem, I think it would just make sense to use passwords, really. I'm a big fan of
yeah.
trying to use um, software within an ecosystem that you already have or that you're already paying for. So, like when I
Yeah.
had Google, I used Google Meets for meetings. I didn't worry about Calendly or Zoom because I was already paying for the service. Um,
Yeah.
I do find we do pay for Zoom now because I don't find Teams quite as good. But yeah,
Okay.
that's just my personal preference.
I have used both Zoom and Teams. So when I was studying, we used Zoom a lot to do like study groups and that kind of thing. So that was quite helpful. And also we had to do like group presentations. So they recommended us use Zoom, log in. I think it's like an hour or a few hours for free anyway. So somebody would create a free meeting and then we'd all jump in and then we'd like do the recording and then we'd all do our presentations and whatnot. And so, but I've always used Teams for work. So I
Mm,
do like Teams. I don't like that it bings at you whenever somebody messages, and it can be like people are like, oh, that sound, and you're gonna, you know, if you're at home, you wiggle your mouse to keep your little spark green or whatever people I see online all the time, because it like tells you if you're online or not. But I like that because it means if I'm about to message somebody or if I need someone or if I want to call somebody and ask them something, I can see if they're online or not. So I can see like
mm,
some people don't like that because they feel like it's a bit of a narc because you're either active or you're not. But personally, if and I'm somebody who needs to connect with a lot of people during work because I'm there to fix people's problems, so I need to be able to ask people questions or they need to be able to ask me questions quite often. So for them to be able to see when I'm active or I can see when they're active so I can either give them a call to help them if they've sent an email through or send them a message, I do quite like Teams for that. And you can also set where you're
mm.
working from. So if you're not working from the office, you can set that you're working from remotely or you're working from home that day so people know. So I do quite like that. And I've never really gotten into Zoom as much because I've pretty much only used it for study. So it was only like a few assignments and things that we kind of had meetings of. And Google Meet, I think I've only used a handful of times, so I can't really comment on how well that is
Yeah, I
personally.
used to love Google Meet. It works very well with Google's system. Um, but it just depends on what system you're in, yeah.
Yeah, so to kind of wrap up this episode for everyone, essentially we have just rambled off a whole heap of different pieces of software, systems, whatever we use. So I think the takeaway for this episode is find what works for you. So we just labeled a bunch of different things. Obviously, Cory works more in the graphic design, branding space, and business ownership kind of space. I'm more of an employee, so I have my employee stuff, and I'm an accountant, so I kind of have different platforms that I work on. But the main thing is either personal or business wise, if you need to use any type of system for whatever you're doing, it's pretty much whatever works for you, because people have different preferences. Like, I don't mind Teams, Cory prefers Zoom. Some people will prefer Apple over Microsoft. So it's pretty much, we've just labeled a bunch of things that we use. So feel free, if it sounds like we do certain things that you guys do, to use those. If you don't like them, guess what? There's always going to be an alternative. Although, I don't really know if there's an alternative to Excel. I know there's different versions of Excel, but Excel, I think, is like a one of a kind.
Google Sheets
but
is good. I use Google Sheets.
Judgment. Judgment. If you're an accountant, I think you'll know online Excel or Google Sheets isn't the same as having the software downloaded. But yes, a lot of the same formulas can be done in both. But yeah, essentially, find the systems that work for you. If you don't like a system that you're using, like Cory and the merger that he's working through, obviously they were using a bunch of different things that weren't really working, and so he's pulling them into one. So don't feel like you need to stick with the system that you've come into or that you've inherited from a previous business owner. Feel free to switch things up and make things work for you, because there's always going to be a different system that might be better for what you're doing.
And also look at the cost of everything. So, my pointer would be, look at the software that you're currently using or what you're paying for, and see whether there's any tools within that ecosystem already that you can use, and use them if you can. If you don't like them, then look for some third-party option. But, some CRM systems can cost thousands, like hundreds of dollars a month. And unless you're using the tool, like we were using one of the best CRMs in the world, right? It's one of the top two CRMs that most big businesses use. And we just weren't utilizing it. You've got to have the time to use all the tools that you're paying for. And if you're not using them, then there's no point having the software there. We just need basic data there to have and to track people that are coming in and out. We don't need to have all the other bells and whistles. So just be mindful of what you're paying and what features you actually need to use.
Yeah, that's a really good tip, actually, because I've seen that happen as well, where we've paid for the most highest premium version of something, and then the company uses about this much worth of that.
Yeah.
So that's a great tip, is if you're coming into any software, or currently however you're using software, check out what subscription level you're on and really do an analysis as to, are you really getting your money's worth for what you're using out of that premium, or can you go down to a different version and save a bit of money because you're not even using some of those features. So anywho, I think we will wrap this episode up. I hope you guys have had some helpful tips in this episode, and you'll take some of these things away and do a little bit of analysis. Might be able to save yourself some money, or you've just heard of a brand new software that sounds like it might be able to fix a problem that you are having that you didn't know. So hopefully you have enjoyed it, and we will catch you guys in the next episode.
See ya.